And you are live.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the Dublin City Council June 21st, 2021 work session. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask that, I think we have Judy with us this evening to please call the roll.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms.
Here.
Ms. Saludo. Mr. Reiner.
Here.
Vice Mayor DeRosa.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here.
And Mr. Keeler is excused.
Great, thank you, Judy. At this time, I believe Homer Rogers is with us this evening. I'd like to ask Homer to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Homer. Okay, this evening we are going to be discussing the Dublin 2035 Framework Plan. And I believe that Jenny Rausch has some comments before our speaker joins us, some introduction comments and maybe a little design for how the evening will go.
Thank you so much, Mayor and members of Council, and welcome to our work session discussion of 2035. I think Logan has some slides to show here, so I'll give him a second just to orient us. But we're very excited to have you all here. So our order tonight, obviously we did our call to order. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to our speaker, who we're very pleased to have with us tonight. And then we are going to allow our speaker to do his presentation and then offer a time for question and answer from either council or members of the public, should there be any. And there's an opportunity online. If you go to the city's website on the main page, there is a comment form that can be filled out, and those will be received in real time and be able to be shared with the group following the presentation. But then also an opportunity for council to reflect on what our Mr. Badminton is going to share with you and how that impacts the big ideas that we've created thus far, and how the information that he provides will help us reflect on that. And then in the second part, we'll be looking at the big ideas to date and reviewing what those are sort of shaping up to be. Obviously, we're going to be entering our major public engagement piece during the month of July, but we really wanted to sort of preview for council what those big ideas are sort of shaping up to be and get your thoughts on those and how those reflect based on the information and the presentation tonight. And then I'll talk through in number 6 in the next step part about the public engagement piece and how people can be involved and provide their comments as we move forward. And then after that, barring any other questions, we will adjourn. So just to frame everybody up for this, so 2035 for members of the public that aren't familiar with the process and the project, I just thought I'd give a quick little overview here, really talking about 2035 and what that is. So as part of council's goals in 2020, which that's hard to believe, that feels so long ago, really looking at how to set the vision moving forward and having an opportunity to define what are big ideas. So what are these big movements that are going to help us look forward to 2035 and developing a framework around that. And the goal of doing this and the why is really looking at how to guide our investments as a city, policy decisions, how to engage the community in a way that is really forward thinking and stretching our thinking as we move forward into the future. So the Dublin 2035 is really a great way for us to look forward and push ourselves. So it's been a really great conversation that we've had so far with council, and I think the next slide shows sort of where we have been and where we are and where we're going. So you'll recognize this timeline slide that we've shown all along. So we've done some initial work in February. Prior to that, looking at, what do we want to talk about? How do we have these initial discussions, which then led to milestone 1, which is what the council committees have tackled over the last 2 months or so. And every committee had the opportunity to generate these initial big ideas and provide their input to that. And right now we have entered milestone 2, which is exciting. So that was an opportunity when we moved into developing this framework, an opportunity the council wanted to make sure that we had expert engagement. So those that are experts in their field that are going to help us keep pushing, keep bringing new ideas forward, an opportunity for that to happen. So this is our first opportunity to do that. And then, as I previously mentioned, the next big part of milestone 2 is the public engagement. So that will kick off following tonight's presentation. And so I'd like to introduce our speaker this evening. So Nicholas Badminton is the Chief Futurist and think tank leader at futurist.com. And he is a futurist that works with the world's most impactful companies and international media to turn to for big ideas, new thinkings, and opinions. So he is here tonight to help us sort of move forward with 2035 and push our thinking forward. So welcome, Nicholas, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. And what I'll be doing is sharing some of the experience and some of the research that I've been doing over the years. And I've traveled the world, obviously through personal travel, but also for work as well. And I've advised everyone from Seoul in South Korea all the way through to London in the UK. I live up here in Toronto in Canada, the fastest growing city in North America. And I've traveled extensively across the US as well. But it's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you about the 2035 plan and just to put that sort of future vision on this from my perspective. So I'm a futurist. I help my clients look out 5, 10, 20 plus years into the future. And what that does is it helps people create future narratives of worlds, what might be, and then we can bring that evidence back to today. And that means better strategic planning. We can take into consideration what everyone needs and what everyone could be over the years as well, in terms of their businesses, their families, and the city as a whole. When I was really young, my mind was ignited to think about the future. My father bought this book for me when I was 8 years old, and I'm 48 now. So 40 years ago, I sat down and read this book about a wondrous world of the future, the year 2000 and beyond. And this is the Osborne Book of the Future. You can find copies of this on PDF online. But really, it was this fantastical world of lunar colonies, undersea, mining, all sorts of things that haven't quite come to pass. So we can have big ideas, and we should really give ourselves permission to have big ideas that push thinking further forward than maybe we'll achieve, because that means that we get people excited. That means that we can start to ignite that imagination, and that's what we need: imagination, creativity. Because if we're stuck in the now, we're not going to really progress with the planning that we need to do and the vision of where we need to get to. So I talk to my clients about shifting their mindsets from what is, the operations of the city, what you're doing today in your community, in your families, in yourselves, to what if the world was different? What if the bigger picture was going to be more impactful for places like Dublin, Ohio, and what could that look like? So shifting that opinion to what if, and really asking leaders and members of the public to start to have creativity around the future is hugely important. Okay, to ground ourselves, I'd like to go back about 260, 270 years to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. At the beginning, there were 3 dimensions of change: communications, energy, and transportation. And they're very much the same today. But today, everything is connected by the internet. We know that communication's going faster than ever before through social media and hearsay, as well as through news and beyond. We've got transportation that's becoming more electrified, and that's becoming autonomous as well. And we're shifting our way away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And that all being connected has led us into what people call the fourth industrial revolution. And that fourth industrial revolution is something that we're all focused in modern cities, to really not only just run the city and make sure that the buses run on time, that you can still flush the toilet and all of the sewage systems works, the mundanity of the city, but the exciting nature of community connection as well. And as a futurist, what I do every single day is I collect knowledge. I collect what I call signals of change. The things that show me today, whether it's in academia and research or in tech companies or in culture and how that's shifting, that the world is going to change. These signals come together to create trends. Those trends give us an idea about that trajectory into the future. So this presentation is going to take you through quite a few of these signals. So strap in, it's going to be an exciting ride. But really, we've all felt this for the past 15 months. I live up here in Toronto, Canada. We came out of lockdown 2 weeks ago, and I sat on a patio for the first time last Saturday in about a year. So we felt this. It's been raw and visceral, but we should have seen a pandemic coming. But what it's also shown us is that the industrial complex is fragile, and it could fail if suddenly we have to really bring the world to a halt. Everything from education to hospitals to schooling, and then through to transportation and business, economic growth, and everything kind of got halted a little bit, and it's starting to recover. That's great. But we have to have that view onto the future. We have to expect potentially more pandemics and also other events as we go through. So I like to frame things using Jim Dator's Four Futures, and Jim Dator is a world famous futurist and foresight practitioner out of the University of Hawaii. He says that we live in four states. We're either continuing to do what we're doing and everything's fine. We've either found our limits and discipline. I think in the past year, we've sort of been operating in that area, and we either transform or we fall into a state of collapse. And there's a constant struggle between this four. I actually think that places like Dublin have got a huge potential to really sort of ride that wave exponentially up with transformation. And this is what the presentation is about, the opportunity that we have ahead of us. Okay, I talk about climate and energy. These are two fundamentals in the world that we must take into consideration in every facet of business, and certainly in terms of running cities as well. We've got a situation that the world is getting warmer. Whilst we might not feel it too viscerally in certain parts of the world, there are certain other parts that are hotter than ever before, and there's more extreme weather events. In fact, the United States Army War College has come out with a paper, and they've said, look, we're going to have more frequent extreme weather events. Things like rising seas, population migration could happen. There's going to be a decrease in Arctic sea ice, and a conflict over natural resources. A food, water, energy conflict is going to be kind of interesting to watch over the next 20 to 30 years. And drought and warming will put an increased strain on the US power grid. I mean, we certainly saw a lot of stresses and strains down in Texas earlier this year, and we could see stresses and strains in other states as well. So we're headed towards a future that I think is going to be heavily leaning on renewable energy, and we've seen a lot of that dialogue happening right now. Carl Burkhardt here looks out at scenarios where 130, 140 different countries around the world start to lean into this and invest, and we can really start to eradicate the use of fossil fuels and the burning of carbon to basically put CO2 into the atmosphere that's causing the warming. We're not quite ahead of schedule where we need to be with like the Paris Agreement. So it's going to get warmer and it's going to get uncomfortable. But what's really good, the promise of renewable energy is great. 86% of global energy demand could be met by renewable energy by 2050. But we have to start now. It's actually more expensive to run a world on fossil fuels than it is to run a world on renewable energy. But there's obviously infrastructure that needs to be paid for. But what's really interesting is that renewable energy can be decentralized. Down in Australia, southern Australia had some real problems with energy provision and generation. And what happened was they had a wind farm. Elon Musk and the team down at Tesla provided the world's largest battery farm there as well. There was a 90 million Australian dollar investment. And after 3 years of operation, they basically paid it off as an investment. So this is the kind of exponential return that you can get from investing in this. But it's interesting because you can go down to the building level. of actually using renewable energy. So we've got micro energy grids in places like Brooklyn, and we've got these people that live in these buildings that trade energy and push energy back into the grid and make money from these efforts as well. So it's interesting that we can decentralize energy and not rely on the grid totally. And I think that decentralization is certainly an interesting thing to look at as well. In fact, if you look at Holland, one of my favorite sort of experiments from an urban planning perspective is something called Die Aardehuizen, which is a settlement of houses, earth homes, where they grow their own food, they've got good management of water, they generate their own energy, and they're completely off grid. And it's these experiments that show us that there could be a new future of sustainability and reliability within communities as well. And then, you know, we look at farming and how important that is, but we can also find that farmers can even put agrovoltaics above their crops and generate energy. So that's extra income for them, and that helps us bring more energy into the grid. And they can even go one step further, and they can do anaerobic digesters on their farms as well, and start to generate extra money. So it's interesting as we shift to this new world that there's an opportunity for us all to generate energy and to push that back into the grid. But there's an interesting future that's coming. When we've actually got a world of more energy required, more electricity required, so electric vehicles are going to absolutely explode in terms of popularity in the next year or so. This particular projection is showing like a 70% growth in electric vehicle sales. I've been driving electric vehicle for 3 years. I just can't turn back to driving a normal internal combustion engine car. Every single major vehicle manufacturer, US and otherwise, is now providing a huge amount of options in terms of PHEVs, which are sort of an extra level of hybridity over and above internal combustion engines, and also full electric as well. In fact, 18.7 million EVs will be on the US roads by 2030, and that'll be up from 1 million just 3 years ago. So things are really exploding in this area. Many of you online listening to this may actually be driving electric vehicles as well. But really, it goes further. It goes further into semi-trucks. Over in Norway, they've got electrified car ferries as well. In China, they've got these huge ships that take containers up and down the Yangtze River, 40 miles up, 40 miles down. And as they load and unload, they recharge. Ironically, they take coal up the Yangtze as well. I don't know quite how that works with renewable energy pledges. But what's really interesting as well, bottom right-hand corner here, is that in China, they're starting to deploy, between 9,000 and 12,000 fully electric buses in their major cities every single month. And this is interesting. It's a shift. And I actually think that this is going to be indicative of how Dublin could be in the future with electrification, off-grid energy, and also the provision of services that rely on this kind of battery-fueled world. But as we look into the further future, this is the big promise. A world of renewable energy generation that's traded in real time across borders, from anywhere in Canada, in North America, down into South America, across into Asia and Europe and Africa as well. Now, this isn't around the corner. This is probably 2050 to 2070. So we've got a ways to go to get there, and this is going to be quite political, and there's going to be a lot of discussions around this sort of global approach to energy, because people are just going to be trying to recover the cost of transmission versus the generation of energy, because it's going to be so cheap. But in Asia and places like in the North Atlantic, there are these microgrids that are starting to work between countries, and that's really promising to me. Okay. Let's move away from climate and energy, and let's look at data-driven government. And we know that data is the lifeblood of any organizational strategy and any operation of any city. But we've seen that software has gained a huge amount of pace. In fact, the famous venture capitalist Marc Andreessen said a few years back, software is eating the world. And in the past 25 years, incredible software is now powering our businesses and our cities and our homes as well. All of these companies here, everyone from like Facebook and Twitter, WhatsApp, through to Spotify, Prime Video, Netflix, Airbnb, even things like Bitcoin and M-Pesa, which is powering financial transactions in Africa, didn't exist 25 years ago. we're gaining a huge amount of pace. And as more of these innovations come forward, more people are building on top of that. And the next great inventions can come out of places like Dublin, Ohio, because you've provided the backbone to be able to do that. So I think that we're evolving beyond those three dimensions of transportation, energy, and communications. They're still part of the mix, but we're adding biology to that. You know, it's us. There's data about who we are and how we operate and how that works out in the world. Wearable computers, Fitbits and the such like are part of that mix, as well as everything like 23andMe and understanding our health data that helps us have innovations in healthcare and medicine as well. And the backbone of that is data. The current world is that we collect data and we transform that into information. You know, the work of spreadsheets. And normally, if I'm there in person, I ask, who loves spreadsheets? There's always a number of people that do, and I think that maybe we deserve something better. But like, what's interesting is, as humans, we turn that information into knowledge, and that knowledge becomes wisdom, and that wisdom becomes incredibly important as we do real world decision making. We evaluate and research and observe, and we provide feedback, and it's a constant loop of value within our cities. But over the next few years, we're going to see a huge growth in data. By 2025, people are expecting over 4,900 digital data engagements per person to happen. That's about one digital interaction every 18 seconds or so. And it's because we're using more systems than we've seen before. There are sensors, Internet of Things, and city systems, car systems, home systems that are starting to generate data more than ever. This presentation could be a combination of these interactions as well. But what's going to happen with the future? Well, this interesting headset that this young man's wearing is a pair of augmented reality glasses from a company called Magic Leap, which sprung out of Florida a few years ago. And it was this promise to remove your need to look at your cell phone and to have data laid over the world. The big picture for this is the next big movement that I feel is going to happen in communications and also data transmission as well. Places like Dublin, Ohio are going to have layers of information. We're going to have the physical world. And obviously, we've got the digital world that intermingles with that and meshes with that. And then mobility, energy and water, health and wellness, communications, entertainment. At every layer, you have data. And imagine if you had a set of glasses that maybe don't look exactly like that young man's glasses, but like something that's subtle, and maybe even contact lenses. And suddenly you look around, you see the information where you need it. And that's useful for the trades, and it's useful for people that work in the city. But for citizens and wayfinding and information and visitors, it could be incredibly compelling as well. And why do I think that this is going to really start to gain pace? Well, Facebook last year announced Project Aria. So they're starting to go out there and imagine if you can connect the 2.5 plus billion people on Facebook to a world that's fully interlaced with data and projected through these headsets. Well, we see a change. And myself as a futurist see this as an incredibly strong signal of an adoption of a new technology that could be useful. I mean, many people 25 years ago wouldn't have imagined that they'd have something like a smartphone in their pocket, and pretty much exclusively everyone does today. Okay, let's think about exponential economies and what they actually look like. When we think about exponential growth, it's about building on top of other good ideas, and suddenly you're not growing by 5 or 10% every year. You're growing by 30 to 50% every year and going ahead in leaps and bounds. 88% of businesses worldwide plan to adopt robotic automation into their infrastructure, artificial intelligence and robotics. So artificial intelligence is the next big movement. It's going to be as important as electricity, some say. It's such an earth-shaking change to how we operate, and automation is going to be in every device and in every system that we touch. In fact, I guarantee that every single person that's watching this particular presentation today has been touched by artificial intelligence. It's in your emails, it's in your systems, and it's everywhere. But I really want to make this come to life by showing you a bit of a vision of the systems that could be out there in the world in Dublin, Ohio. Okay, it's interesting to think about the big visions there. Some of these were speculative. So the idea about personalized flying vehicles, or even the Amazon blimp warehouse that's got automated drones, is going to revolutionize our lives eventually, even though they were speculative. But what's interesting about things like technologies, once you speculate and you can define what that future can be, you can even put together a patent that gets awarded. And this was exactly what happened with Amazon a couple of years ago. So we're going to be seeing Amazon blimps in our skies in the future. In fact, advances in AI will transform modern life by reshaping transportation, health, science, finance, and the military as well. In fact, some people are saying that there's going to be over a $15 trillion added to the global economy by 2030 due to increased productivity and consumption side effects. This can be a good thing. It means that we're not stuck in the drudge work of data and we're out there pushing a wisdom economy. In fact, AI is on such a fast trajectory that we're seeing that by 2024, translating languages, writing high school essays, driving a truck by 2027, working in retail, and even writing best-selling books and working as surgeons by the year of 2053. So it's going to come and it's going to impact our lives entirely. And that changes this approach to data. And it means that we're not undertaking the work of collecting data and building spreadsheets and really combining that and working out what that data means. We've jumped ahead. There's lots of automated systems helping us free up our time so we can focus on knowledge and wisdom. And that wisdom is really going to mean, better services, better operations, and better ways of operating our city as well. But what about the jobs for the people in the places we live and work in? Well, I think with artificial intelligence, there's a narrative where people come out in the press and say, it's going to destroy millions of jobs around the world. It's going to change this industry, change that industry. We've never seen anything like this. In fact, technology over the years has never really destroyed jobs. It's just changed the work landscape. And in fact, as humans, we have to remember that you can't really codify empathy, humor, creativity, and problem solving. You can't really build that into machines. So our future is human and the machine, and what I call intelligence augmentation. We're going to use this technology to be better at our jobs. It's not going to replace us. It's going to take some of our tasks away from us, but that's okay. There's a transformation that we're headed towards, if you remember the 4 futures that I spoke about earlier. But with this data and access to systems like artificial intelligence, and now that our intelligence is augmented, we can start to think about operating cities in a way that's bionic. It's sort of taken to the next level. And there's 3 parts of this. There's behavioral capital, which is the collection and modeling of data that tracks the behavior of people, companies, nature, and man-made things. What we operate and what we notice from a biological perspective as well. We've got cognitive capital, algorithms that represent codified knowledge, flows of individuals and enterprise in a bionic world. And that means that we can exploit the wisdom and insights in our communities. And then we've got network, which is the connection points in the community between enterprises, between the city, between everyone that works there, the communities, and the families that live there as well. And these 3 are incredibly powerful when they come together to create the idea of the bionic city. And in fact, this is a model that's been being used by some of the biggest companies in the world, like Alphabet, who own Google and Facebook and Amazon and such like. Okay, we talk about technology, we talk about data, we have to talk about smart cities as well. So smart cities can have everything that we've spoken about, artificial intelligence and sensors and data and renewable energy and all the goodness that there is. But really, we're starting to see a huge amount of pace behind putting technology infrastructure into cities. In fact, worldwide smart cities market will grow from 622 billion to 3.48 trillion by 2026. So people are investing, and they have to invest in the right ways. And I've got some examples of some of those cities that have done really well. Bristol is a city that I grew up near in the UK. I was about 40 miles south of Bristol. And it was a city that came up with a program about 3 or 4 years ago called Bristol is Open. They put a big data pipe in the back backbone of the city, very much like Dublin, Ohio. They connected essential services, universities, libraries, essential businesses, banking, and it's really caused them to take a look at how infrastructure can work for people. In fact, the research that they've been doing and continue to do is looking at the benefits of 5G, software-defined networking, the Internet of Things, and the sensors that are out there and the big data analytics that you can use on that. AI, machine learning, analytics on closed-circuit television cameras, and high-performance computing. Another example I like to talk about as well is Barcelona, which has been a bright, shining light around smart cities as well. And back in 2008, when the world was not in a good place in terms of recession, they spent a bunch of money across 12 different areas to invest in smart city infrastructure. And in just a period of 2 or 3 years, they saved 95 million annually through smart lighting and water management. They just weren't managing it as well as they could with technology. Increased parking revenues by 50 million per year. I don't actually know what they were doing with parking, so that's a bit of a mind boggler. But what's really interesting is the city generated 47,000 new jobs as well. So technology doesn't destroy jobs, it creates jobs, it creates new ways of working. And in fact, now, if you look at it today, everything from utilities and security through to healthcare, mobility, and economic development, there's so many different parts of how they operate their city that are touched by data and by artificial intelligence and by sensors as well. But what's really important is not the technology that we put as the foundation of our smart city, it's the people within that as well. People who live in mono-functional, car-dependent neighborhoods outside of urban centers, which is a lot of places in the US and Canada as well, are much less trusting of other people than people that live in walkable neighborhoods where housing is mixed with shops, services, and places to work. It's interesting when you look at parking alone as a facility across the United States. Each car in the United States has got 8 parking spots ready to use. And it's interesting that an average parking spot is about 300 square feet. And these are spaces that we can reclaim. In fact, the roads that have been built to create thriving communities that kind of have been working against us a little bit. When we have to look after infrastructure that isn't built for people, but built for cars more than anything else, then we've kind of got the balance of the city off. If we look at Highway 14 in Lancaster, California, they approached this by looking at this thoroughfare through their small city, and they thought, what could this be? And they redesigned it to be a boulevard. Yes, you could still drive through that, but it's very different. And you've got this Ramblas in the center of the street, and it can be utilized for different events as well. That's very exciting to me in terms of building community cohesion. In fact, places like San Francisco are starting to think about how they can shift some of their highways and the thoroughfares in their cities to be more green, more bike friendly, and more motor friendly to people being able to walk and even having pedestrian zones as well. This is a shift that we must pay attention to, and it's going to be important going forward. In fact, one of my favorite cities in the world is Paris. And the Anne Hidalgo, the mayor, has said, okay, we're going to redesign it. It's going to be called Paris en Commune, and we're going to take the arrondissement, we're going to redesign them. Everything's going to be within 15 minutes walk of wherever you stand, everything you need, from healthcare to schooling to shops and beyond. And what's interesting is that there's a brave movement to completely redesign how Paris looks. If you've been to Paris, you've probably been to the Champs-Élysées. And today the Champs-Élysées does not look like this. But the idea to take back the streets is really strong in terms of building community in places like Paris. In fact, she's trying to rid the center of Paris of the majority of vehicles that are there today. And if you've ever been to Paris and tried to park there, you know that this could be a good thing, that you could actually maybe walk or cycle around without the fear of being potentially knocked off your bike around the Champs-Élysées. Okay, let's think about deeper engagement and how we can really build that cohesion in the cities, which is so important. We can look at new models of open government, where we look at consultations with citizens that happen more regularly, deliberation, we look at policy that are being progressive, we can organize partnerships, we've got open data. And I imagine that that Dublin's already down this path somewhat, but really doubling down on this means that we've got a constant conversation that doesn't happen every quarter or every year. It happens all of the time, and that's really healthy. One of the initiatives that I've been talking about for about 4 or 5 years now has been something called Hello Lamppost. And Hello Lamppost is an idea around using your cell phone to connect with the city infrastructure to have conversations. Can you talk to a statue? You can walk up to a statue, you can scan the QR code, and you can have a conversation with it. What do you mean? Well, people give a personality and a conversation to the statue, and they connect to other people that have spoken with it. And it talks about the situation of things beyond statuesque facilities in the city, to parking meters, bus stops, mailboxes, buses, fire hydrants, all the things that we rely on. Once we understand a context and a place, we can have a civic dialogue, things get really interesting. In fact, in places like Independence, Oregon, they've deployed this as an engagement technique. They had over 2,200 conversations, over 1,000 players, and over 6,400 interactions. And the participants learned about local landmarks, the culture, and they provided their opinions, which was all too valuable for the council. And the community feedback was gathered around core values, emerging ideas, investments, and ideas for further consultation as well. So these exciting sort of art-based projects can really ignite that creativity, help with problem solving and collaboration as well. I lived in Vancouver, British Columbia on the west coast of Canada for about 12 years. I moved to Toronto 2 years ago. And every year I used to go and do this thing where between 2,000 and 4,000 people used to be on bikes, and we all used to get dressed up, and we used to go around and have a rave. People would have sound systems, and we chose nights in the summer where we wouldn't disturb too many people. But it created a familial cohesion in the city, which was really interesting. The heart and soul of the city is something that we need to really work to propagate and build. Things like mural festivals and street art, I'm a huge fan of this. The culture can be painted onto the walls, and that can spread further. We can inspire our children with art that lives on the street as well as lives in art galleries as well. And we can also look to building community food initiatives like the Detroit People's Food Co-op and people like Malik Yakini that's doing amazing work in Detroit in terms of turning land that wouldn't be used into farms that can actually provide cheap food for people that need it the most. But what's the step beyond that? Okay, we've got cohesion. Once we create that social cohesion, we've got happier cities, but we have to also become sustainable as well. The circular economy is truly going to change the world. When we start to think about reducing consumption, reusing what we have already, and recycling what we have already, then we can start to see a real bright world. In fact, some people have calculated about 380 million more global jobs and $12 trillion in business savings and revenue could be achieved by 2030. People like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation out in the UK, United Nations that I work with, they're really behind this. It's the idea of reusing what we already have and repurposing that, because we can't keep producing the amount of waste that we have. And off the back of that as well, there's a big worldview as well, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I work with the United Nations on some climate resilient initiatives as well. But it's been found that companies that lean into working on affordable clean energy, life below water, reduced inequalities, a number of these different development goals have been able to drive more profit, and because they're more responsible and they've got greater connection with the people that operate with them and the businesses as well. And actually the sustainable life that we can operate under is actually better for cities, it's better for businesses, it's better for life as a whole. And I use an acronym when I think about cities and the development that we need to do, and it's HEART. The H stands for human-centered design. We like variety and certainty and significant and growth and connection and love, and this is who we are, and this is who we've been for tens of thousands of years, and we're going to continue to be that way. And we have to come back down to what we really need culturally and societally, as well as from a technological basis. Obviously, we need an entrepreneurial spirit, and I see that in droves in places like Dublin, Ohio. And so that's really heartening as well. And the conversations I've had with council and the consultants that have been working with them has been really heartening to see that happen. And then asset development for the greater good. We don't build facilities and things for the few, we build them for the many. And that's really important as a principle. And then we have to come back to renewable, repeatable, and replicable, those circular economic principles, and even SDGs as well. And sure, underneath all that is technology-enabled connections. Technology still is really important in the world of people, process, governance, and government as well. But what do I do as a futurist? I help people look out a little bit further. I help them speculate. I do something called strategic foresight. And it's been incredibly busy, and it's been busy for all the people on my team and other people that do this in the world. In fact, more cities, more big companies are starting to invest in this kind of activity. Once we can imagine the future, we can build a bigger vision, strengthen strategic planning, and anticipate risks today. And I've got a simple framework, and I set out a number of principles. So I put humanity before technology. I understand that there's no future, there's futures. We've all got a different destiny. Plurality, inclusion, and equity, and ownership is hugely important. Then we've got to lean on the science. We look for those signals, we write those hypothetical scenarios, the big stories about how the world could be, and we could go even further and do art projects and write books. But really, we're considering everything from organizational change, regulations, environmental impact, politics, technological and social dimensions as well. And then we can start to speculate about what projects could exist in Dublin, Ohio in the future. And once we tell those stories about a future that could happen, we can start to bring that evidence back to today and strengthen strategic planning. I did this a few years ago with Vancouver International Airport, and it was a really interesting engagement with the public as well. And take a look at the stories that I put together. We just did a short video to show how everything from artificial intelligence, vertical farming, augmented reality could completely change that travel experience.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
What was really interesting about this was we were aiming to have about 4 to 6 meetings, public engagement, getting ideas, doing design roulettes and sessions. What had actually happened was I wrote 5 science fiction stories. We did this amazing campaign, billboards around the city, around the airport. We engaged local media. We had 18 million impressions. We ended up having, I think, 14 different sessions, and we had more cities in Greater Vancouver Regional District wanting to be involved. So it was a great hit because people were inspired about the future. And what was heartening about this was some of the ideas visually that we worked with, creative, artistic, exploitation of the stories that I'd written have now kind of become a reality. So vertical forests providing food to the airport, whilst we don't have that today in Vancouver International Airport. This year, they've actually built something that looks exactly like that, which is a glassed-in island where you can go outside and come back inside. Maybe eventually they'll provide food from there as well. But what we found is foresight and futures work actually delivers value. In fact, research has shown that a high future preparedness can expect on average 33% higher profitability and 200% higher market capitalization growth. And what that means is that we've just got a better grip on where we might go, and we can make better decisions today on where we're going, so that suddenly we're not flying blind into that future ahead of us. And that's it. The shift from what is to what if. And what I've tried to do with this short presentation is show you a little peek at what's happening today, but the visions that are starting to take society and culture and community and families into the future, into a world that's really strongly based on sustainability and a way of living that doesn't damage the planet, but in fact provides exponential growth and thriving for local communities. And when I was chatting to people in Dublin, they were hugely excited about, Hyperloop and what that could do, and being able to go from Pittsburgh through to Chicago via places like Dublin. But what's interesting about this is that it ignites excitement and imagination. And out of that comes groups of people that want to work on this. They come up with new ways of solving problems, new engineering challenges. It excites and causes what I call the ripple effect into the community, where people are excited to innovate beyond the idea of one particular initiative into many initiatives that can change the future of Dublin, Ohio. And that's why I call this the Renaissance, Dublin's Renaissance. Is that the future is going to be exciting and vibrant. It's going to be cultural, and we're going to be connected better than we have ever been connected before. Thank you so much, and I really love to take your questions.
Thank you, Nicholas. I'll turn it over, if that's okay, to Lindsay. I know she's got some questions ahead of time.
Sure.
And then again, our council has any initial questions for Nicholas as well, please feel free to chime in.
If council doesn't have any initial questions, we can go ahead and jump to some questions that we have. And I wanted to remind everyone joining via live stream that you can submit your questions and comments through our website, the form on our website right now. So if you have any questions for Nicholas or would just like to participate in the conversation, please feel free to do that. We do have a handful of questions that have come in, some before the session and some during. And I will start with some questions that the planning team developed based on comments and recurring sentiments that were shared during the council committee discussions. So first question for Nicholas, what innovations should cities like Dublin be prepared to accommodate?
Yeah. When I look at the big world view, I think that there are going to be three major areas that we're just going to have to get really good at optimizing and managing, and it's around water, food, and energy. Those three things are the things that we need to operate, seamlessly and in ways that produce food, produce energy, and reduce the reliance on so much water. So if we're going to invest in innovations, we have to kind of think about how we're utilizing water, because it's a limited resource. Right. But also how we can feed people and give them the food that they need without having to ship that food in from all over the United States, something maybe a little bit more closer to home, but also how we can work with that energy sort of provision. And earlier in the presentation, I spoke about renewable energy, the idea around decentralization. What's the strategy around solar and wind and run of river and all of these things that can actually provide, clean, renewable and very, very cheap energy to all of the residents and the operations of Dublin, Ohio.
Thank you. Next question is, how would you define a successful futuristic city?
It's interesting, the word futuristic, sometimes we can think of Star Trek and flying cars and all that good stuff. And I actually think that futuristic cities are cities that just work really well, but cities that listen to the people that live there and the businesses that operate there as well. So how do I define it? I define it as a place where people are speaking all of the time. There's social gatherings, there's the ability to come together, because that's what defines a happy city. There's a book by Charles Montgomery called Happy City, and go and read it because it's interesting. They didn't find that suddenly having more technology or better bus services or more restaurants or retail made anyone happy. It was having places to congregate and having that social cohesion that really created a happy city. So I think that if we think about this in terms of happiness, in terms of a priority for us looking into the future and success as well, that's what we need to do. So I define a successful futuristic city as a place where you can see that people are on the streets, they're happy and they're connected. Let me tell you a very quick story. 3 years ago, I flew down to South Korea to work with the United Nations, and I stayed in Songdo, South Korea, one of the world's most technologically advanced cities. Songdo Business District, connected, data backbone, cameras, it was built, you know, with green spaces and places for people to live and retail, but it was designed in a way where it was modular, and it's like, we'll put this here, we'll put that there, we'll put that there, and there weren't people on the streets, and there weren't people having those social gatherings, so it kind of failed. So we have to, there's a warning in that, you know, smart cities and all the technology in the world doesn't create happiness, right? We have to really come back down to, you know, a cultural heritage. And from what I see with Dublin, there's a huge amount of cultural heritage there. And it's just about dialing that up to 12 and then creating even more spaces. And sure, technology is going to be there and data is going to be there. And that's how we, as people running the city, are going to really, you know, do our jobs better than ever before and create more happiness as well.
Thank you. What are essential considerations for the future of housing?
It's really interesting. So there's a whole other presentation that I could do around construction and housing, you know, modular homes, tiny homes. We're living in exciting times. I mean, when I look around where I live in the west of Toronto, and there are office buildings and there are residential apartment buildings, there are houses being built all around me here, and I'm pretty sure you'll see that wherever you travel in North America as well. But really, what we have to do is work out exactly what do people need. You know, do they need more square footage? Do they need certain kinds of facilities? What kinds of utilities and what kinds of spaces do they need outside of housing as well? I'm not a person that spent, you know, 25 years in urban planning, but I've certainly been part and parcel of seeing what's happening in the world and spoken to many planning departments. And it's one of the most difficult things to answer. What's the future of housing? And it comes back to, like, what do we need to provide for people to be, you know, looked after so they can live happy, fulfilling lives with their families, right? And, you know, there's a taste thing. Sometimes people want big homes. Sometimes people want small homes. But as the youth are growing up, I've got a 10-month-old child. I can guarantee you in 20 years' time, he's not going to want a 25,000 square foot house. He's going to want the flexibility to live and work wherever he wants. So there's going to be some transition. I think if you create an environment where the people want to live in Dublin and raise families, that's great. But people like my son could travel through Dublin and work for periods of time and really look after them, the live workspace and whatever. It could be really exciting to look at those different configurations.
Thank you. And this next question, I think you touched a little bit in your presentation, but maybe you can elaborate on a few more. What cities comparable to Dublin are models for innovation?
Yeah, I spoke about Bristol. I mean, that's about 10 times the size of Dublin. I spoke about Barcelona. That's even bigger. I mean, there are smaller places around the world, places like Aalborg in Denmark. If you've ever been to Denmark and you've been to Aalborg, it's absolutely beautiful. But, you know, they've signed charters where they can actually look at, you know, management around traffic and climate, nature conservation. Places like Chiang Mai in Thailand looking to really boost their local tourism economy, but by doing smarter city planning as well. And places in the Netherlands and Japan as well. What's really interesting, they've all got a common theme, and that common theme is public engagement, you know, often, and really listening to what people want and feeding that into the plans as well. And whether you're the size of Dublin or you're the size of somewhere like New York City or San Francisco or wherever, the principles are the same. It's like listen and learn, and still get the basics in place and make sure that you can still flush the toilets and you can still get on a bus and know that you're going to get to your destination on time, right? But you can go far and beyond that in terms of understanding the heart and soul of the city.
How can Dublin adapt to evolution while preserving its legacy?
Again, this is it should be easy, but it could be tough, because suddenly, you know, the legacy that we have, the history is so important. We have to celebrate that. We have to spend time reminding people of that as well. You have to preserve, you know, what is Dublin as well. You know, you don't just go through the cities and tear down everything and build new, and suddenly this new Dublin is better than ever before, because you have to have familiarity. You have to have something that's really great. Having lived in Vancouver, in Canada for a number of years, it's a city that tears down old and replaces it with new, and it feels like it. And in fact, it feels a little asinine and distant. And whilst it's by the mountains and the ocean, it lacks something. Here, where I live in Toronto, and I have the same feeling in San Francisco and New York and London and Paris, there's old infrastructure and there's old buildings. And that's kind of good to see, because if we're reminding of where we've come from, we've got a sense of achievement. And I think that sense of achievement is important. And if we can take that sort of pride and put that into new infrastructure, then suddenly, it's true evolution, not revolution. And suddenly the city has got it's got a pinch of old, it's got a pinch of new, but it's still Dublin, Ohio, and it's still something very important for everyone.
Thanks, Nick. And now we're going to transition to the public comment portion. We have had some comments come in from the public, and some of these questions might be for you or really any of the council members. Anyone can jump in, and some are really just comments. So I will read and then pause for any responses. From Robert Fathman on Tartan Circle North, he says, things I would like to see in Dublin. An arena like that proposed for Bridge Park, bringing in lots of hotel revenue and support for local restaurants and shops. Number 2, a long-term plan to put a multi-use path north of the Scioto River's west side all the way to Glick Road. If a homeowner won't sell or grant an easement, when that property goes on the market sometime in the next 30 to 40 years, buy it, grant the easement, and put it back up for sale. Eventually, we will have the land rights. And number 3, better controls on residential development to stop crowding of the schools. So Nicholas, if you have any comments on anything like that, please feel free to chime in, or we can see if anyone else has anything to say.
I'm going to say one thing, but I'm going to defer very quickly into the council on this as well. I think that it's really important. Again, we spoke about social cohesion, right? Things like arenas. I'm just going to comment about the arena side of things. I think it's more important than just revenues for hotels and restaurants. It's people getting together, which actually means like more hotels and more restaurants and more ideas around how you can service them. But that's the only comment that I've got on that one, Lindsay. And the other things seem a little bit more city business. So I'll pass over.
Thank you. And a couple of comments here from Chris Kelly at PO Box 1944. Just wanted to comment that Dublin Community Foundation has established the Gunderman Fund to help underwrite future planning and smart growth activities like this. Citizen participation and education are essential components of future planning for our community. So that was from Chris Kelly.
Great.
And we'll move on to a comment from Nelson Yoder at 5927 Rings Road, who simply says, thanks for being visionary and thinking about our future. And then I have received a handful of comments from Andrew Bittner at 7050 Dublin Road. First question is, has Dublin considered on-site renewable farming to create resiliency and healthy food growth for all members of our community? I am really looking forward to this discussion. So Nick, maybe you have some thoughts or perspective on that, and then someone maybe from the planning staff could speak to if Dublin has considered that.
Yeah, renewable, regenerative farming is hugely important. We've now got the technology to build things like vertical farms, rooftop farms as well, and we can grow the food like close to home. And I think that that's really important. I've seen a lot of cities double down on that, and we're seeing like people being able to grow food without having to go like hundreds of miles from the field into the city. And you've even got new technologies that allow you to grow greens in supermarkets right there in place. So it's a great comment on that in terms of renewable and regenerative farming as well.
Hey, Nicholas, I have a comment for that because, and maybe you're familiar with this and maybe you aren't. We had a planning session here years ago, conservation design, where we were trying to save on curbs and all this construction costs by trying to teach the developers the different ways that they might lay out a subdivision. Now, one of the benefits of this is exactly what you guys are talking about, urban farming, because there's a lot of common ground that came up once you
Right.
clustered the housing units and grouped them together. Now, our builders and developers in our area said, well, you know, all this is a little too progressive for us at the time. But it sort of goes back to the comment that this person just made about urban farming and common areas that can be developed for food. And I don't know if you're familiar with conservation design or not, the philosophy of it, how it works. It's a cost savings for developers, but it clusters the living units together and preserves the forests, the common meadows, and those kind of things for food production. So in 1998, we proposed that. We called in 25 developers. They all said, this is way over our heads. We know how to carve up a piece of ground and put 25 lots on it, a half acre, and that's what we're capable of doing. And what you guys have to do is way too progressive for us. So, you know, it went by and we were thinking about spreading that over South Dublin as a overlay.
Yeah.
And so I just want to see your comments on that.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've been caught in this cycle of short-termism and you know, and cost reduction and, you know, being efficient with our own businesses without this bigger picture of the community as a whole. I mean, if we're looking that far back and like people were like closing the door on really, really good ideas, and people have been closing the door on really great ideas for a long time. But I think those days have to end. You know, I do think that people that are building places to live have to consider all of these elements as being important. And I guess it's down to the city to work with them and work out how you can mandate these kinds of facilities and, you know, farming activities and whatever, and how you can put them in. But what you can do is you can go back and look at what's been built today and work out how you can actually build those facilities on the roof, in the gardens, or whatever as well. So it's really interesting to hear that story. But it's a story I hear all over North America, is that, you know, it's too difficult, it's too progressive, but that's shutting the door on, isn't that just a really good idea for the community and for people in the community? You know, it's astounding to me.
Yeah, what was interesting about that concept was it was less expensive for the developers to build housing. One of the most expensive ways to build housing is in a grid where you run sewers and lines up and down. And what this thing was the byproduct was allowed common areas that could later on be farmed or used for agriculture, but were really view sheds for all the people so that they weren't all packed in. The housings are aligned in an array in a way that's radiating out, which creates a lot of common area, and they're clustered. So that was interesting because that was 1998, and I don't know, the council probably didn't have enough umph at that time to take on the developers and go ahead and do it, you know, and push it through. So
so I just want to add things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. More, you know, when you're working with these developers, you need to ask them the question: are they looking at this? Are they taking some of these seriously, and are they applying them to their business? There's a company up here that's an engineering company. They build facilities, big arenas, and everything like that. Stantec, and Stantec last year, they're operating their profit was up to 49% of their profit was directly attributed to alignment with 7 different SDGs, and that was up from like 46% the year before. So there's real profit in being able to get behind, you know, renewable, recycle, circular economy, SDGs as well. And, you know, when we're looking at the people that we work with, we have to ask them the big questions about what are they doing? Because if they're building infrastructure that's going to last for, you know, it could be 100 years, could be 100 years plus, it better be doing the right things for us as our community and the planet as well, right?
Okay.
Hey, Lindsay, I had a question for Nick. Nick, you know, one of the things that I think is interesting about some of the conversations that you made about shared spaces, are there conversations going on where businesses, government, and residents are thinking about shared buildings or rather than unique standalone? It just made me think about from a housing perspective and a work perspective. Can you share some examples of what you're seeing in that world?
Yeah, I'll talk at it from two perspectives, one from business and one from personal and community, familial sort of residences.
Where's our pasta?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Kathy. So if we look at this and we start to see, okay, the pandemic has kind of shaken up a lot of different cities, and I've advised a couple of different cities across the United States. And very much it's like not as many people are coming back to work, and that's going to affect our urban centers. But what are we going to do with these buildings? How are we going to repurpose them? I do think that you are going to find hubs of businesses working together. And that can only deliver good things. We're already seeing that in sort of the startup world and incubators. We're seeing that in co-working spaces. But I do think that larger companies can share space. And if they've got businesses that are complementary, they can do innovation together. And I think that's fantastic. On the flip side, I think that there's sort of there hasn't been a huge cultural shift to families living together and duplexes and all that too big across the states. From what I can see. But some of the things that I have seen is, more community housing where there's shared resources and the ability to do things like they were doing in Brooklyn in terms of generating energy, providing that, or Diaderhusen, where you've got a little community that's like a commune in a way, are certainly interesting models to play with as well. But, there's still this thing in North America as a whole, including Canada. People like their own space, but people also like to be connected to their communities as well. And we've just got to make that easier. And we can do that through construction. We can do that through the provision of facilities.
Nicholas, I'd like to ask you a question. We're a suburban city. So unlike some of the other cities like Barcelona and that sort of thing,
Sure.
we have our own challenges because we're spread out, although we have our little urban core.
Yeah.
But because of what you said about the fact that people can work from anywhere in the future, we may be at an advantage because as a suburban city, we offer amenities that an urban city cannot, which green spaces and that sort of thing. But we can't offer at this point the 15-minute city because
Right.
we are. So do you have any suggestions on how one retrofits suburbia to create a futuristic 15-minute city that connects us all, still offering the amenities, the green space, the natural resources, the bike paths that we have that we consider kind of our jewel?
It's interesting. Over the pandemic, there's actually data behind this. Places like New York City, people moved out of New York City in droves, and they're coming back, but like not all of them, right? But they've been moving out to suburbia. It's happened in Texas. It's happened across the states. It's been really interesting to see where people have been moving. So, suburbia, exurbia, those kinds of ideas, and how you connect them is one of the biggest challenges as well. That's why there's going to be a really exciting movement of like light rail services, mode shift, maybe even these autonomous personal, flying vehicles. I don't want to call them flying cars because that's a little bit too much for me, But what's interesting is, in suburbia that's spread out, it's not always going to be a 15-minute walkable city. But having the ability to allow people to cycle from one place to another really quickly is going to be hugely important. E-scooter businesses are just exploding right now across the United States as well, like Bird and Lime and the others. So we're going to start to see people, cycling more. They're going to be out of their cars. They're going to be on their bicycles or whatever. And now what we're going to have to do is work out if we do provide extra services for people, where are they and what can you congregate around those services? Because you're not going to go to one place to get your bread and another place to get your artisanal cheese, or one place, we're not all going to be flocking to Walmart or all of the big box stores. We kind of want something that's a bit more cultural. So how can we build those cultural places for people to go to? So I think that there's a huge opportunity. I've spoken to people that develop strip malls and outlet malls in the past year, and they're like, what's happening? Places for creativity and studios to produce media, using things like containers to build these new kinds of facilities quickly for co-working. All of these things are absolutely perfect for a suburban area as well, and provide something that's so important within that sort of place as well.
Thank you.
Hey, Jane, Jane, I would say that I think where that's going to happen is, I think we already do have it. It's just the intensity uses aren't there yet. And once parking is in demand as it is at present, there'll be an opportunity for more intensive uses to happen on those spaces, you know, all throughout the community. I think we're closer than we think we are once parking demand drops.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Chris, but I would say that Nicholas really nailed it when he said if you allow for micro transport, we have centers of mixed use within many of our little neighborhoods. The problem is they're cars auto-centric, and it's difficult to walk to them, or if it's difficult to ride your bike to them or hop a scooter to them because the traffic is so bad. So we might be able to retrofit by thinking in that arena.
What's interesting about microtransportation and having that infrastructure is it ultimately leads to a healthier population as well.
Well, I don't see another hand, but I have another question.
Sure.
So I'll take this as my last opportunity. I really loved your principles of the three principles, one of them being that it's centered around the people.
Yeah.
So human-centered design apparently for you is paramount in creating a happy and a successful future city.
Yeah.
So as we look forward to creating our future, what are the pieces and parts about a human-centered design? How do we begin to capture human-centered design in our planning?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is providing platforms for the public to have active participation in design. So what I've seen work really well, what I did with YVR Airport, I worked with them, I worked with a PR team, I worked with their executive, and we brought people into rooms to do, you know, roundtable design charrettes. And what's really exciting about this as well is you can go to the local colleges, you can bring the kids in, you can get a truly diverse point of view. You can get, you know, the elders in the community and young people, the people that are working, you know, the people that don't have families yet but are looking to settle down and do that, and the people that do have established families in a room. And with people that are trained in doing good, you know, design thinking, human-centered design activities, you can start to really push the boundaries about what Dublin could be. And, you know, we don't have to ask permission to be creative. We can just be creative. And sure, we can take a look at the baseline of where we are. And if there's particular initiatives, hey, build off the back of what's being planned and start to question it and start to build, you know, ask the questions about, you know, what if, you know, the future, you know, could be different in a number of different aspects, right? And when we start to look at these, it's so exciting when you're in a room. You know, there's ideas and post-it notes and you know, whiteboards, and people are drawing. You know, there's the ability to run competitions for design. There's the ability to inject art and culture and performing arts into cities. I think all of this is really, really important as well. I mean, sometimes when we've approached city design in the past, it's kind of like, okay, we need to do the most important things, and like we can't take our eye off of that. And today we've got the important things, and we've got the important things like culture as well, and social cohesion, which are equally as important as putting in like the hard infrastructure, right? So that's the way that I see that. And you know, I talk about humanity before technology, because there's something in Foresight called colonization. If you say, okay, you're going to work in this particular way and within these boundaries, then everyone doesn't have a choice. They have to do that. Creating somewhere that provides flexibility ultimately leads to, you know, more business, more economic development, more happiness, and more cohesion, which ultimately makes Dublin a more essential place to visit and to potentially move to, right? So it's really important.
Nicholas, I've got a comment. In your comment about technology, we need it, but you know, there's no joy in it in itself. And people need people to be happy. And you know, we've just finished the Bridge Street corridor, which was sort of to me, it was just a copy of a European downtown that you saw all over from Zurich to Hamburg to Stuttgart, where people could walk around
Sure.
at night, and there were shops, and then people were living above the shops. And, it's an old European concept, but it's relatively new for us, and it's been very successful for us. Another thought we had was creating these mini concepts like this. There's different plots of land like OCLC that would accommodate this kind of thing. What do you think about, because people interacting with each other and each one has a sort of a different vibe, a different look architecturally, a different feeling to it. What do you think about building these mini cities within our city that have these pedestrian friendly zones where you can eat and walk around? And we've been kicking this dog around for years and trying to think of other people to get involved and other parts of our city to be involved in this. And we just concluded this first one rather successfully in just, I don't know, about 5 to 7 years. So what do you think about that? I mean, as an idea for our city?
I think it's around, experimentation. I think that there are opportunities to put ideas out on the street fairly quickly with non-permanent infrastructure and just ideas. So one thing that I see on the streets of Toronto here is they've got they've literally built patios on all of the roads. Right, it's now because I still can't go and eat in a restaurant because of the pandemic, which is which is painful to me. But like I sat out on a patio and suddenly you've got hundreds of thousands of people on the streets congregating, and it does feel it feels not permanent, but it also feels exciting and interesting and experimental. So I think that it takes a lot of time and money and investment to put in major developments that are going to suddenly change the look and feel of the city. But I've seen that there's been a lot of places that have been able to take certain streets, shut them down, put in facilities for the summer period, try new things, get public feedback whilst you're doing it, experiment, that can actually lead to some really good ideas for the future developments as well. So that's really interesting. There's also something about imagination and showing people what it could be, or inviting them in to be part of that. What does it look like to you? What can you draw it? Can you describe it? And that's really interesting as well. And then even putting that into a system where people can vote on it and have conversations and get together. And I think that that's really interesting as well as a progressive way of looking at urban development.
You mentioned about walking sort of, with this kind of new city, and you mentioned, people will be healthier.
Yeah.
What do you think about, here's a crazy concept, the blue zone city? We have blue zones in Costa Rica, we have them in Okinawa, we have them in Sardinia.
Yeah.
Has any cities, to your knowledge, and there's, certain factors that would create a blue zone city where you would move to the city and live an extra 3 to 5 years because it's a healthier city,
right?
And be a place to go to because that it's organized in such a way that your life would be extended. So just your comment on that kind of idea as a progressive idea. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think people are looking for that. I mean, no one likes to really dwell on our mortality, and I think the last year a lot of people have really seen a little bit too much mortality in the news, and unfortunately closer to home in families and communities as well, right? So if you can start to think about the burdens that we've been dealing with through capitalist society, smoking and fast food and all these things that are parts of the economy, but aren't necessarily good for health. But creating places that are devoid of them as well and celebrate things that are more healthy, you're just gonna, what happens when you have a healthy population and you attract healthy people? You're having a healthy economy. And that's what I think about this. You can actually go to bluezones.com and start to look at some cities around North America as well. So, so beach cities in California, they reduced obesity by 25% and tobacco use by 36%. Well, that sounds like a great place to go to, right? Spencer, Iowa, 50% of city workers eliminated one disease risk factor because they changed the way that certain facilities work. It's really interesting, and I'm so glad you brought up blue zones. I don't have tons of examples, but I do think that it's really interesting to think about health as a public strategy. I think one of the big examples that I've spoken about over the last like 10 to 15 years, it was Oklahoma City. And there was a mayor that came into power, and he realized that there was a huge amount of obesity, and he realized that there were no sidewalks anywhere. It was a city for cars. And what he did was he put in infrastructure for cycling and walking, and over a period of time, people just got healthier, people lost weight, and it became a better city. So it's interesting.
Is that?
Hey, Lindsay, I want to make sure that we stay on track a little bit. We've got a little more than 40 minutes left together. Do we have any more public comment from through the web chat?
Yes, we do have a handful of more questions at this time. And I can jump right back into that. We did have one other question from Andrew Bittner, and this is a real softball question for you, Nicholas. I'm sure it should be simple to answer. In reference to data and privacy,
yes.
How can Dublin take advantage of being a smart city while also protecting the privacy of its citizens? What is the balance? Have you heard of IOTA, or for protecting personal identity while also using the Internet of Things framework?
Yeah. So I speak a lot about security and privacy. I talk about cybersecurity as well. Privacy is probably one of the hottest topics out there in the world. Are we talking about all these technological systems? You know, if you're on Facebook, you've signed away your rights. If you're on Instagram, all these platforms, you've already signed away your rights. They own your data, right? We can't be like that in a city. So we have to be very careful about the relationships and that we create, the partners that we have from a technology perspective, and where that data lives. You know, ultimately, there are many layers of complexity from a technical architecture perspective of a city and of the systems within the city. I would personally like to see a world where the citizens of Dublin, Ohio, whatever they use within the city, they know that they own that data, they have a right to access, and they have the right to sell it if they want other people to use that for research or advertising or whatever. But the citizens are in control. It's called data dignity, and companies like Microsoft and the office of their CTO is doing some experimentation around that. There's some big thinkers like Jaron Lanier, who's sort of a quite a progressive thinker in everything from virtual reality to who owns the future. So it's really interesting. I don't think we're quite there yet, but there needs to be some important questions asked as we start to bring technological systems in. How can we maintain control? And I spoke about open data very briefly. How can we make this data accessible to, you know, startups and other companies that could maybe build systems for us that work for Dublin, Ohio, without having to rely on off-the-shelf sort of solutions as well, which could create, you know, a community that's developing their own solutions that leads to economic growth.
Thank you. My next question is from Jerry Kozicki at 4313 Wyandotte Woods Boulevard, who says office parks that are separated from residential and commercial areas seem less desirable for companies than they used to be. What are some successful examples of how to redevelop traditional office parks to make them into walkable, vibrant areas?
These questions are amazing, by the way. Sorry, I'm just thinking examples of these. It's kind of interesting. By themselves, like these business parks are kind of built to not be that human. They're built to be the places you go to work and then you leave work and you go home. So, you know, they can kind of be devoid. If you start to look at some more progressive companies and companies with a lot of money, let's be honest, someone like Apple down in Cupertino in California, and you've got that big ring sort of donut shaped HQ, and it's got green space and it's renewable, and it's based on the circle of these places are like, you're always walking, you're always meeting someone, and that collaboration and those water cooler moments create collaboration and new ideas is incredibly exciting to think about as well. And they've got facilities around fitness, around amphitheaters and whatever. If we're going to take old infrastructure, you've got to kind of start to think about multi-purpose, multi-use, and you've got to kind of think about it's not always going to be the mega corporation that's going to take over one building. How about having buildings where you can actually put, 100 different companies or 100 different startups and create something vibrant, and they're surrounded by people that have got a lot of cognitive capital and experience in the world, and let's connect everyone together. Now, how does that work in practice? That's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of coordination by the city, but also the business community as well. So there needs to be some sort of leadership that comes together to create that. But it's an absolutely fantastic question. I mean, I've spent my career in business parks, and sometimes it can be really soulless, and sometimes it can be wonderful. And what's happening now is people are starting to realize that, it can be more than just a building for people. It can actually be something that's vibrant and worthwhile. I visited the HQ for NVIDIA. They're basically a software and a hardware manufacturer down in Silicon Valley, down in San Jose. And their building, it was this big, epic, clearly they've got billions of dollars in the bank. And you looked around and it was like there was no art on the walls. It was all gray. And there were like cubicles in the corner, and there's big wide open spaces and great places to congregate to talk. And I was like, what gives? They're like, well, we're going to do work, and then we've got all these spaces to have creative outlets. And then they took me upstairs, and there was an Irish pub on the top floor of this big hardware manufacturer. And they were like, yeah, and sometimes we just like to let loose and get together and just have a good time. And sometimes that's on a Tuesday, and that's okay. So it's kind of, there's a relaxation of business, and there's a deep breath and also an exhale that's happening in the modern world of work.
Hey, Lindsay, I would just like to add, if Mr. Kosicki is listening, I'd invite him to participate in the public meetings that we're having upcoming with the legacy office parks. So I'm sure that Mr. Badminton isn't aware, but those are some of the exercises we're doing right now. I don't want to get us off topic, but I would like to invite him to participate in that. And perhaps you can reach out to him later and get him some information on those opportunities.
Absolutely, I will do that. Thanks, Mayor. And we have one last question, and this is from Marie Keister at 7759 Crawley Drive, who says, Bridge Park and the Dublin Link pedestrian bridge are so iconic. Friends who visit remark that it's like a vacation destination. Does that reinforce your idea that Dublin should continue to focus on places for the community to congregate? How can we use that concept for historic Dublin and city streets?
Yeah, I love the use of the word iconic as well. We sometimes forget, what we create as iconic within our cities. Sometimes it can be as subtle as, you've got walks that explain the history and tell the story of streets. And that idea of hello lamppost, right? Or hello statue, or hello park bench, or hello monument can be used for public engagement and depth of education. I think once you start to build an infrastructure of education within a city, you get really hugely inspired. I used to live in a place called Union Street in Vancouver. It was in part of the downtown east side, part of Chinatown, which is amazingly vibrant. But I lived in a community that was bulldozed to put in a trunk road and a viaduct. And what they did was they literally destroyed the Black neighborhood of Vancouver. Now, what's really interesting is that history came out over time. And now what's happening is the viaducts are coming down and they're rebuilding that neighborhood, and they're trying to celebrate that cultural part as well. And that takes, a celebration of what was once there, a recognition that some bad decisions were made, but also that there's, reconciliation around that, and we can do some really good, future vision as well. And what it does is that connection from the past to the present and into the future that really creates something very special, because something new and fresh doesn't always have the cultural relevance and significance. So we have to have that Dublin history running through as a vein through all of the new infrastructure as well. And some of that is communications, and some of that is infrastructure for social cohesion and that conversation as well. And really good planning takes into consider all of that. And the best cities in the world are the cities that celebrate the old, and they also celebrate the new as well.
Thank you, Nicholas. And as the mayor noted, we do have some other business to move on to for the evening, but we hope you'll stick around. And I just wanted to remind the public that we will leave this comment form up so you can continue to submit your comments, questions, and ideas for City Council to consider over the next several months. And now I'll turn it back over to Jenny Roush.
Great. Well, what a great question and answer by council and by members of the public. And if things come up, we'll definitely work with Nick to see if there's things that he wants to chime in on, and also wanted to offer the opportunity for council members. I know Nick has previously agreed if there's some offline conversations that anybody would like to have with him to further discuss some of this, we can definitely help facilitate that. So obviously you can reach out to myself or to Jamie and Logan, and we'll figure out how to make that connection. I just want to make sure there were no other last questions for Nick before he signs off. We definitely want to use this last 30 minutes to get your reactions to the presentation, and then have Jamie have the opportunity to just sort of brief you out on sort of the big ideas list. So are there any other questions that you all have for Nick? I want to make sure you have the opportunity to ask him. Okay, well, again, thank you, Nick, so much for being here and for sharing your great thoughts and pushing our thinking forward. And for your great answers to the questions. So appreciate this dialogue.
No, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Great. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Jamie. He's going to help facilitate this sort of second half of our meeting here. So.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. So I think some of you have been looking at the agenda. I know the mayor has. Like we extended some of the earlier part because of the Q&A was, going well. So we'll compress a little bit here on the end of the meeting, but I want to just reinforce that we're still in this generation of ideas, right? I mean, we're going to go to the public here in July, as Jenny said earlier. So you gave us a lot of ideas. We've worked on those. We're going to talk about those, but this process, you can think of it, I think, like an accordion cadence, right? We're going to bring in ideas, work them, and continue to massage as we go forward. So we don't, even though we've got a really clean looking list right now, it is not the definitive list of big ideas to consider in the work. We're going to still go on that. But before we talk about, the ideas that we have so far, I was just curious, you were able to ask Nick some questions, but I'd like to know, like, if you have any reactions to, what you heard and, the perspective that you may have gained that will help us going forward. Anything you'd just like to share your reactions to? Yeah, Kathy.
I very much, Nicholas, appreciated the comment from what is to what if, because it allows you to have some freedom of, is it practical today? Don't know how I'd do it. Not sure how I'd retrofit this. But the what if phase, it just allows us to imagine certain things, and then the hard work of how to do it comes later. And I very much appreciate that perspective, because sometimes when we start to do big ideas, we will, if you will, try to bring them back into the day and now. So that's probably the worst thing we could do at this point, because we're still very much in the idea generation. And I think the biggest risk is that we don't think big enough during this particular. So I very much appreciated that we began the discussion with that and ended that with that discussion with that tonight, because I think that as a framework is exactly what we have the opportunity and the time to do. So I appreciated that. Thank you.
Great, Kathy. Other reactions to, could be big thoughts or small thoughts about what you heard from Nick?
I heard a lot of reinforcement from the kind of things we're trying to do, mobility, the possible track coming through Dublin. A lot of things he pointed out, I think we're interested in and we're already starting to think about. Yes, there's going to be a big leap into the future. My question always has been, is it the moral responsibility of the city to provide a healthy environment? That means a walkable environment, or for its citizens, and is that our responsibility? And I always believed it was, to provide those bicycle lanes and those things to get people outdoors and have them move around. And get exercise. So I, you know, always saw that as a moral component to the job of being a council person.
Mhm.
And you know, so no, it was really good because a lot of these things that he's talking about, you know, we're engaged in and have been discussing, you know, literally for years. And so it was good reinforcement to see that we're looking at that bigger picture for the community
Mhm.
and a lot of different venues. So
Mhm.
really refreshing. And you know, so and it restarted a lot of ideas like conservation design when he brought up local food being raised in your neighborhood and things that we had let go for let's see, God, almost 40 years. You know, ideas that we had that were very progressive for their time, but either the city council didn't have enough to pass it, or the lobbying developers were so strong that they decided to suppress it. Those kind of ideas, you know, that sprang up in Dublin that were very, very progressive that have been sort of put on the back burner. You know, it's maybe time to rethink some of this stuff because of what Nick was saying. And those are very futuristic ideas that we had. And maybe, you know, Columbus, Ohio, this area, Central Ohio, wasn't ready for them yet. So, you know, so he refired my engines on some of this kind of creative stuff we used to do here.
Okay. John, you know, if there are some specific ones, and it sounds like there are, and we want to get them back in the hopper, if they're not on our list right now, you know, we'd really appreciate your help in getting them back in the mix.
Yeah.
But not tonight, but yeah.
Yeah. And one of those things was conservation design, because Nick hit all the key points of the futuristic city, and it was
Yeah.
basically conservation design.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of neat, really.
Yeah. That's great. Other reactions anybody would like to share about what they heard and what it may have stimulated? Jane, did you have something?
I think Christina had something. I wanted to make sure she had an opportunity to talk if she wanted to say something.
Jane, I appreciate it. You are always looking out for me, and I really appreciate it.
I apologize,
I
Christina.
saw your hand up a couple of times. I didn't want to jump in since I've had some time already.
It's all good.
I need this. No, Christina, I didn't see it. Sorry about that.
It's all good. It's all good. I found a lot of the conversation to be very interesting. Some of it's a little bit scary, to be honest. But I think that for me, it's sort of that intersection of a lot of the different things that we've talked about, from the Hello Lamppost, which I think is a super interesting idea, and I think a way to really engage a wide group of people on a lot of different levels. And the technology exists to do that today. It's a matter of cost and implementation, and what do you implement first, second, third, all that. Intersectioned with the economic development piece of things, because you got to keep the place vibrant through tax dollars. That's just the way that the model works. And that has to do with our legacy office parks. And, you know, we're going to be having more discussions about those specifically. But, you know, how do you make buildings that become more flexible, so that as we dive into this future of, you know, hybrid work experiences, you know, sharing those spaces to micro transportation, that becomes really important when you're talking about having people being able to get to the places where other people are so they can interact. And then having those social interactions and doing all of those things within the context of diversity and inclusion, and what that means for your city and how your city interacts with others. And bringing folks in and what that means, and walkability. There's so many aspects. And for me, how we bring those things together and intersect them together in ways that are meaningful and not just pocketed is really important. And I think that, you know, Nicholas really hit on so many of those things, and how they're intertwined with each other, and why they're all important, not just individually, but as they work together. And I think that's where some of the big ideas are coming from, and how we will choose to implement and work through those will be a really fun discussion. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Christina, would you care to share about the, you know, what was a bit scary and what you were hearing?
Yeah, the Amazon thing, flying up in the air, and people not actually leaving their houses, and with things coming directly to them. I'm like, that defeats the purpose of having social interaction completely, and was terrifying.
Yeah, it was something. Greg, is there anything you would want to share?
Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge in all of this industry. I do sometimes wonder and maybe you guys could comment on this. I wonder sometimes what is driven by private industry and what is driven by government incentive or government subsidized or the government creating the environment that allows the private sector to fulfill some of these things. And how do we balance or interact between those two different things? And if we're getting in the I understand setting the stage and sort of creating an environment where things can grow naturally or organically. How do we cross a line of picking sort of the winners and the losers, and we're picking and choosing as opposed to letting the market forces dictate what's needed and where it's needed?
Yeah.
It just, whenever we have these conversations, that always comes back to my mind.
Sure. No, I think, and you guys do a terrific job in Dublin of, I think, calculating the return on investment for what you do in the community. And a lot of those investments you make do change the market dynamic. And that's a really important question here. It's probably part of the how-to question that we have to get to at some point. But the fiscal piece and, out of the finance committee, this idea of a new economic model is really fundamental. I believe that has got to be part of that group's work. Jane,
like Nicholas wanted to say something.
Innovative, forward-thinking, progressive private industry people do have a degree of risk. There's a degree of risk and how much risk tolerance they have, how much risk they're willing to take in order to have something succeed. And a lot of projects and ideas don't. And I just wonder sometimes if we as the government get involved and then the project does not work, how do we absorb that kind of loss and then or risk? How do we balance that risk on behalf of the taxpayers who are paying the bills?
Yeah. So Greg, it seems like as we go forward and we get, narrowing things, I think having some perspective about to make any one of these initiatives happen that might bubble up the big ideas that you want to go forward is to try to craft some perspective on what does it take to make it happen and how much of that is government versus how much of that is private in the work, is getting some perspective on that early on. So did I hear that Nick had something he was wanting to say?
No, I didn't have anything to say. There's just one word that always hits me when you think about private enterprise. It's agenda. Up here in Toronto last year, we had Sidewalk Labs, which is part of Alphabet, which is part of Google, like Google's Alphabet, and they were going to redevelop the whole part of the quayside that's abandoned right now. We just couldn't come to any agreement on the use of the land or the use of the data. In all reality, the agenda was to basically build a Google campus, but it was under the auspices of redeveloping this land. And eventually they walked away because I think that there was a resistance because people were saying, what's your agenda? And nothing was clear. So yeah, I think that there does need to be city-led conversations around what's the agenda and what are you doing for the city. But ultimately there's always the cloak and dagger of private enterprise aren't doing it because they're just really nice people and really care about wherever they're going to be developing in, right? They're doing it for profit in one way or another. So these are really difficult and important conversations to be had straight up front with anyone that wants to come in as private enterprise as well. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's important, Nick. One of the things that I think Dublin enjoys that a lot of other suburbs in Central Ohio doesn't is that, folks want to be here. And the city's been able to work with them and maybe get things that they don't get in other places, other communities don't get just because they want to be here. And I think that's the kind of condition that the city wants to continue to create to where this is a very desirable place and that gives them more leverage in that regard. Okay, Jane, we're back to you.
Well, thank you, Jamie. You know what? Christina's used a word that has been on my mind ever since, we started all this conversation, and that is afraid. This is what I'm afraid of, but I know that we can mediate it. I'm afraid that as we develop, we will lose track of, and this is the most important thing that I heard from Nicholas today, that we will lose track of what makes people happy. I worry that as we develop, and I sit on planning and zoning, we concentrate so much on the building and the structure and where it sits and how far away from the right of way it is and all of that, that we forget that the building is only one tiny piece of the puzzle. And hearing him say that it's human-centered design, that his principles are humanity before technology, plurality, inclusion, and equity, and scientific fact and creativity. When you put all of those elements together and you bring that forward at a planning and zoning commission, then your argument is much stronger than the word placemaking, which I use all the time because I think the word placemaking is going to bring us those things. But placemaking is only a pocket park or a piece of art. It's not the comprehensive discussion that Nicholas brought forward today about it being about what it does for the person to nurture them, to make it a lifelong place to live, to create an environment that makes you happy to be in it. And that's the scary part for me.
Yeah.
Is to be able to achieve that as we move forward into the future. I'm so afraid that is so cloud-like, so impossible to hold on to, impossible to write down in a zoning code that we will not capture it. That's my fear. That's my impact in listening.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Merritt, is there any observations or reactions you want to share?
I agree with Jane. These concepts of placemaking and things, and it really takes me kind of my mind goes to the time on the planning commission, and Mr. Badminton referred to it a little bit in that it's the master planning and the failure that he has seen where everything's perfect and it still doesn't work. And I think it's a combination, Jane, of the things that we're doing or you're doing on the planning commission of trying to implement some placemaking things, but at the same time having a master plan to make sure that it's all present. And somewhere in those two spaces, the magic happens. And I think that's why some areas have been successful, and then truthfully why some areas of the city have been unsuccessful, is that sometimes we deviate and we win, and sometimes we deviate and lose, and that's just life. But I agree that the talking lamppost thing, that was very interesting. At Leadership Dublin's graduation, they did an exercise where they're trying to implement that in the cemetery with all of the headstones, and and I would say that that's scary to me, right? Like, who's going to write the history? Who's going to be the one that tells that narrative? Who is going to, so it's all scary. Life is scary in this day, probably in every day it has been, but it feels a little bit more scary today than it did perhaps 2 years ago. But great dialogue and great line of thinking. And I just appreciate the time and the opportunity to think, because we don't slow down and do that nearly enough.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. This whole rate of change that we're going, yeah, I see, Kathy. I was just going to say, in response to your comment about the fear, I mean, the rate of change, I'm sure Nick's got statistics about the rate of change. It is incredible about the rate of data that's being created every day, exponentially, and just trying to assume what that would, or feel what that would look like in artificial intelligence. It is a really unknown future. Yeah, Kathy.
We spend more time pursuing happiness right now than we ever have before in any time of human history, and we have more unhappy people than we've ever had. So, I don't know what to do with that. But sorry, Kathy, didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I had a comment, and then I would think maybe we'll go back to Lindsay to see make sure we have opportunity if there's more resident input, because we'll have lots of times to go through our list later, but
Sure.
That would be great. It was interesting. Wikipedia was one of a very interesting project early on when the community was trying to figure out how do we capture information and really begin to automate. And that was one of the first crowdsourced things, and it's still incredibly successful today. So there is just, I think, some really interesting models when we think about doing community development and crowdsourcing that may be scary on some level, but we have some examples of things that have been really, really successful on very large scales. And that one just came to mind as I was thinking about it. And maybe if Nicholas had a couple thoughts, and then maybe if Lindsay can let us know if there's other questions.
Sorry, Kathy, can you just repeat that, please?
Large scale, when you come together to solve some of these problems there are some examples where the communities and the crowdsourcing have done absolutely amazing things that might have seemed a bit scary. And I know Wikipedia was in the beginning about, well, who's going to tell the stories? So
yeah, so it's interesting. I've got a story that's really interesting from Iceland, actually. So a few years ago, they were like, okay, there's not that many people in Iceland that are actually Icelanders. So it's about 120,000 people. Everyone's in the phone book, right? Even like, even like the prime minister, right? You can call them. And what's interesting about that is they're like, oh, why don't we crowdsource our constitution? And this was a huge case study. I used to talk about this at this is innovation at scale, crowdsourcing crowdsourcing a document that's important for government, the constitution, and then we're going to get all these ideas from every part of society. It's going to be more equitable. Everyone's going to have a say, and it's going to feel great. And I used to talk about this all the time in terms of like crowdsourcing and good ideas. About 3 years later, they completely abandoned the process because fundamentally, everyone doesn't know how to write a constitution, and probably like 80% of all the ideas that came forward weren't even actionable or usable. So you had to have the expertise as part of that, and just a reduced amount of people that could aggregate the ideas coming into those sort of bigger movements. And now they're sort of back to an old process in a way of, they have public engagements and they bring that, they distill it down, and now the new constitution is going to be done in a way that's slightly better than before, but not really as broad brush as they thought. In terms of, if we look at democracy, and how people vote and how people change, I mean, that's probably the biggest shift of mass action that I can draw on, and we, whether it's changes in political power or Britain choosing to leave the European Union, like some of these things, it can be incredibly polarizing as well. So you have to sort of balance these things out and work out exactly, how everyone's going to have a voice and, what's going to happen en masse. I don't have any more good examples at such a large scale as well, because it's really difficult. Once you become a group of people over 100, you ultimately you become de-individuated and you lose your identity. So there's something to be said about smaller working groups, but listening to the greater populace through other activities as well, that leads to really positive and well thought through action. So I know that was a bit waffly and went in different directions, but hey.
Lindsay, do you have any other?
Yes, thanks for checking in. We had 3 questions, sort of comments coming in from Sue Swit at 7356 Tullymore Drive. So I'll just read them all at once, and then maybe council can just consider them and anyone can respond. Number 1, transit is still such a headache. What is the big idea for this last mile? Question number 2 is, so many people have great ideas for fun, but don't know how to get started in the city departments. It can seem exhausting to big picture thinkers. For example, where do you get a permission or permit? What comes first? What is allowable? How much would this cost? And then she suggests, could we start a volunteer managed Department of Fun? Trained volunteers would help shepherd people with ideas through the process of starting, holding, engaging the community in ways to have fun or get together. Maybe a huge IRL game of Where's Waldo at the park. And that concludes Sue's comments and questions.
Those are some great comments and questions, Lindsay. You can probably, not that this answers your question, I don't mean to make it that small, but we have little starts on some of those things in terms of the neighborhood block party packages that are available and that communication. So that's one thing. It isn't a solution, but it's a little tool that we have access to. the last mile thing, I know that we are all working on that mobility piece right now, and I think we owe better answers than what we have at present. But maybe share with her the things that we've done, and you know, and in realizing that we're not there, but it is a project underway. And I like the Fun Council. I think that's a great one.
Yeah, I agree. I concur. I think the idea of a bunch of citizens getting together and you come into this city and they have an entire fun committee who maybe be using our bocce ball courts or whatever, our new paddleball courts or whatever. But you know, I think that's a neat thing. You get a bunch of people that are fun oriented and they form a committee, and what a neat thing to find out about a city, that it has a giant fun component, and the people are there to try to create fun and help people see the Irish Festival and all the other stuff we're doing that's fun, and the concerts. And I think that, you know, we ought to make her the chairman of the fun committee and get rolling on this idea and see how many other people are interested in joining in the fun.
Yeah. Mayor, did you want to end at 8 o'clock? I mean, we're really close to that right now.
Well, I think maybe we should have the conversation. So I think the list of big ideas, that probably is not something that we could even start to nibble at tonight. So we have them, you know, they were loaded in board pack. I went through and looked through.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably something that we would save for another time, because that's a whole nother session in and of itself, I believe. But I don't want to cut anyone off if there's something else that they would like to address. And I'd like to hear, Kathy, you know, this, you know, 2035 stuff is something you've been working on with, you know, with all of council. Is there a direction you'd like to see us go?
I know if Lindsay if there's a couple more questions, I would love to take just a couple more minutes to answer those questions. And so thrilled to have Nicholas with us. We have his expertise here tonight to maybe do that. And as you say, you know, this is the kickoff for more community development. We'll have some chance to do that. So maybe if we could see if we could answer, Lindsay, if we had a couple more questions and conclude there, I think that would be wonderful. And thank you so much, everybody, for doing this tonight.
Sure, thanks for checking. We had a few come in through the YouTube chat. Bill Adams asks, how do you see the demographic changes, i.e. immigration, factoring into future cities?
Yeah, okay, it's super interesting what's actually happening in the world. If you actually look at the shifts in the world, the largest cities in the world by the year 2100 are going to be in Africa and Asia. And what we're also seeing in places like the US and Canada as well is we're going to grow a lot, and all of the cities within the US is going to grow a lot through immigration, and that's going to happen. And we're going to have, you know, people from the Indian and African continents as well. I think that's a real positive movement. What's really interesting is some stats. By about 2050, the US is going to be more of a plural nation. It means that there's going to be no one group that is absolutely bigger than another. So Hispanic and Caucasian and you know, South Asian and whatever are all going to be fairly evenly distributed in a way. So we're going to have this more diverse, and there's going to need to be a need for inclusion. And I think that this is going to make cities, you know, the diversity and the inclusivity that's going to be needed it needs to be like front of mind today. And I just think that organically we're not going to, you know, have a population boom, but immigration is going to be that way forward, as it's always been in North America as well. Like the entire country was built that way, and over hundreds of years we've come to where we are. But in the next sort of, I think, 20 to 30 years, we're going to see huge movements to places like Dublin, Ohio, and that's going to be great for the economy. It's going to be great for, you know, society and culture as well as a whole.
Thank you. And just a couple of comments from Susanna Farver, who says, let's make Dublin a very green city. No plastic bags or styrofoam, so we don't add to landfills and ocean pollution. San Francisco was able to do it with 700,000 people. Her next comment is, we also need to offer a marketing idea around recycling and composting. We have it, but many don't use it. It is a small learning curve to create a culture around it. And then she suggested, how about creating a monthly Friday night bike skate through Dublin?
Yeah, they do that in places like London and in the UK as well. They just take over the streets. I love that kind of thing. So
We'll put her on the fun committee because that sounds like a lot of fun.
Okay. So Lindsay, is that all the questions then?
Those are all of the comments and questions we have so far.
Hey, Lindsay, I do want to just respond to her quickly and let her know how much we all appreciate her commitment to sustainability. And I know that's a conversation all of council has had significantly relative to the DORA. And I'm hopeful that we're moving towards all events in the city of Dublin will be a zero landfill event. And I think those are conversations that are happening and will continue to happen. And we look forward to that opportunity. And again, we're not there yet, but I do want to at least encourage her to let her know that she's right on.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So Kathy, I thought I heard you say we would take these questions and then you think we could wrap it up for tonight at 8 o'clock?
I think it'd be wonderful if Jenny could share with the community sort of the next steps and sort of the way forward. And this is the beginning of a dialogue. So I think that would be wonderful if we could maybe conclude with that. Jenny, does that make sense?
Sure, that sounds great. And I think maybe that even helps with the punting of the review of this list, because again, we don't want people to feel limited to the discussion that we've had thus far. We really want to make sure that we're taking into account all this really great public engagement that we've had tonight and what we anticipate for the month of July. So yeah, really briefly, we are going to kick off our public engagement campaign here in July following tonight's discussion, which is going to include a variety of opportunities for the public to be engaged, either in a digital fashion or an in-person fashion. And the website, we have a website created for this, which is, you go to the City of Dublin's homepage and scroll down actually to some of the information for tonight. It's under that Dublin 2035, so you could even search for it that way as well. So it's pretty easy to find. That includes all the information about what we've done so far, but I know that Lindsay is updating that with what's to come, which will include some items being mailed to residents so that they can find a way to participate, a digital questionnaire, as well as then a in-person or handwritten questionnaire option for those. And we're hoping to have opportunities for staffed options and unstaffed options at places around the city so that we can make sure we're covering all of our bases and getting out where people are, such as the North Market or the library or the different plazas or park areas. Just again, so we can get people out there and get interacting with the residents and gain some really great input to help shape these ideas. And as I mentioned, that's going to take place over the month of July. So we're going to try to spread these things out. That way we can keep the momentum going and keep people interested as we move through the month of July. And then I know that Lindsay's going to work all of her great social media and email databases that we have for our events as well to keep people informed and engaged along the way. Which then ultimately will take all the information that people provide and look at that and share that back with council so that you all have an understanding of what people have said and how that aligns with what you've all come up with. And again, I'm assuming we're going to have some really great opportunities to hear things that we hadn't thought of yet, which is great, which is the whole point of this. So we'll also be engaging our boards and commission members as well. So we have opportunities for that and additional stakeholders. So a really great opportunity to hear from the public and see how that aligns with what council's thinking and help move it forward. So if anybody has any questions, obviously you can reach out to myself. I'm happy to field any questions that the public may have on how to be engaged, and I know Lindsay as well. So thank you again for the opportunity tonight, and thank you again to Nicholas for being here. It's been a really great conversation, and appreciate all of your thoughtful questions and comments. With that, Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Well, Nicholas, Jamie, Logan, thank you for giving us some of your time and talent this evening. Certainly do appreciate that. Jenny and all of the planning staff and all of you folks that helped assemble this, it's much appreciated. And I know it is a yeoman's work, but it certainly doesn't go unnoticed and isn't lost on us in the community. So appreciate that. With that, I don't have anything further. I'm assuming that the clerk's office will be circulating some more dates for us to continue this conversation, and we will look forward to that opportunity. And with that, there's a little bit of daylight left, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Longest day of the year today, right? Soak it in. Good night. We'll stand adjourned.